People always talk about the weight of fatherhood like it's some burden, but to me, it was the only thing in my life that ever made sense. Her name was Melina. Born on a rainy Thursday in March, small enough to fit in the crook of my arm, and loud enough to make the nurses laugh every time she screamed. Her mother left us when she was only 7 months old, walked out with nothing but a duffel bag and a lie about needing space. I waited for weeks, stupidly thinking she'd come back, that maybe postpartum had gotten the better of her, but she never did. She was gone, and I was left holding a baby I barely knew how to raise. But I figured it out, one bottle, one lullaby, one broken night of sleep at a time. I didn't come from money, and I sure as hell didn't have a safety net. I worked security at a warehouse by night and delivered for a catering company during the day. Most nights I slept in 20-minute stretches with a baby monitor on my chest and formula stains on every shirt I owned. There were moments I thought I was drowning, when she was sick, when I couldn't afford daycare and had to beg my neighbor to help, when my car broke down and I walked 3 miles with her bundled in a stroller through snow just to get to work, but I never let her see me fall apart. I kept that part of me hidden, locked up tight in the quiet places of the night when she was finally asleep, and I could let out the kind of tears no one ever talks about. I did it all without applause, without backup, and without ever hearing the words, "thank you." But I didn't need them. At least, that's what I told myself back then. By the time Melina turned 16, she was everything I had hoped for: sharp, ambitious, sweet when she wanted to be, and quick to correct anyone who underestimated her. We'd have our arguments like any parent and teen, but there was still this rhythm between us, like we understood each other without always having to speak. She knew how hard I worked, even if she didn't always acknowledge it. And I took quiet pride in watching her succeed. Honor roll, part-time jobs, college scholarships. I told myself, this is what it was all for. Every unpaid bill, every sleepless night, every meal I skipped, so she wouldn't have to. I was building something for her. I just didn't know she'd end up rewriting the whole story without me in it. When she came to me about the wedding, her face lit up in that way it used to when she was a little girl asking for an extra scoop of ice cream. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, fingers dancing over the glossy pamphlet from some fancy vineyard estate she'd found. "It's perfect, Dad," she said. "It's everything I ever dreamed of." Her fiancé, Marcus, was a decent guy from what I could tell, respectful, had a job, didn't seem like the type to cheat or lie. I liked him well enough, and I wanted to give her this. I wanted her to start her new life with beauty and celebration, not the kind of quiet struggle I'd known for too long. So when she said the venue was expensive and that Marcus's family couldn't cover it all, she looked at me with that old glimmer in her eye, the one that used to mean, "I trust you, Daddy." And I nodded, told her I'd take care of it. No hesitation. I dipped into the savings I'd been hoarding for years, money I'd secretly planned to use to finally replace my rusted car or maybe take a trip for once in my life. But I didn't blink. I wired the deposit that same week. The house felt different in those days, full of lists and fabric swatches and laughter from the phone calls she'd make to her bridal party. I mostly stayed out of the way, cooking dinner when she was too busy to eat, listening when she wanted to vent about seating arrangements or how Marcus's cousin was allergic to gluten. I kept thinking about how far we'd come. From those nights in our one-bedroom apartment where we'd curl up on the couch to watch cartoons with a blanket pulled over our legs, to now, planning a wedding fit for royalty. I didn't say much, but inside I was proud. Not just of her, but of me. Of us. We had made it through hell and back together. At least, I believed we had. Looking back, I don't think I ever saw it coming. That shift, that quiet rewriting of her past. Maybe there were signs I ignored. The way she never kept photos of us on display, the way she brushed past stories from her childhood when Marcus asked, or how she never invited me to meet his family formally. But I chalked it up to nerves, to her being busy. I didn't think too hard about it. I trusted her, and maybe that was my mistake. Not seeing how deeply someone could love you, yet still erase you from the parts that matter most. Not realizing that all those sacrifices I made could one day become invisible, like I'd never been there at all. The real gut punch didn't come until the night before the wedding, during her bridal shower. I wasn't even supposed to be there. Just stopped by to drop off extra wine and the cake she'd forgotten to pick up. I walked in through the back in trance, not wanting to interrupt, when I heard her voice float through the hallway. She was laughing, glowing, standing with Marcus's family in the living room. I paused, hearing her say something that made my breath hitch. Oh, my mom raised me all on her own. I've never really had a dad. Just one of those things, you know. The room chuckled lightly. Someone made a sympathetic sound. And then she continued, but she did such a good job. I never felt like I missed out. I didn't move. Couldn't. It was like the floor dropped out from under me, and I was still pretending to stand. My hands tightened around the cake box until the cardboard creaked. I felt a heat rise in my chest that I didn't know how to name. Rage, grief, betrayal, all tangled together into a storm I couldn't speak through. I set the cake down on the kitchen counter without saying a word. I walked out the way I came in. No one noticed. No one called after me. No one asked why the man who'd raised her didn't stick around to hear the toast. And in that moment, something broke. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed with my hands clasped behind my head, staring at the ceiling like it might offer some kind of answer, like it might explain how a child you raised from diapers to degrees could wipe you clean from her story without flinching. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice again, light, cheerful, almost proud as she told them I was never there, that she was a child of a single mother, that she never had a dad. Those weren't just omissions. Those were erasures. And they weren't said in passing. They were offered like facts, like truths she'd rehearsed for the benefit of a future that didn't include me. She'd rewritten her history in real time, and I was sitting in the audience, watching the man I'd been for 25 years vanish in a single breath. I couldn't stop thinking about the moments she had chosen to forget. How I used to braid her hair in the mornings when she was little, clumsy fingers trying their best to copy YouTube tutorials so she wouldn't feel different from the other girls. How I took night shifts and slept in my car during college tours so I could afford the hotels and gas. How I stayed up during every flu, every heartbreak, every time she cried over a boy who didn't text back, always reminding her she deserved more. How I clapped louder than anyone when she walked across that graduation stage, tears in my eyes, thinking, we made it. Not just she, but we. Because that's what it always was. A team. A bond forged in fire. Or so I thought. The morning of the wedding, I said nothing. I went through the motions like a ghost. I ironed my shirt. I packed my shoes. I checked the venue confirmation email out of sheer habit, even though my stomach had been in knots since the night before. She came downstairs just after 9, barefoot and glowing, humming to herself while sipping coffee. Dad? She said, like nothing had happened, like she hadn't ripped out my heart and served it cold to strangers the night before. Can you make sure the photographer gets there on time? He's supposed to show up at noon, but I want a few early shots if possible. I nodded. I looked her right in the eyes and nodded. That moment felt like standing on a frozen lake, knowing the ice beneath you was already cracked, but pretending it wasn't because you didn't want to embarrass anyone. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't notice anything different. Or maybe she did, and she just didn't care. I watched her disappear back upstairs, humming that same careless tune, and I knew, that if I confronted her, it wouldn't change anything. She'd offer some excuse, some vague explanation about how it was easier that way or how she didn't want to complicate things. Maybe she'd even cry and make me feel like the villain for caring. And I'd fold, because I always folded when it came to her. I'd forgive, because I always forgave. I'd write off my pain as overreaction, as drama, as ego. I'd become the unreasonable one. Again. But something in me, some deeply buried shard of pride or preservation, refused to let that happen this time. I went out onto the porch and sat there for a long time. The sky was soft and gray, like it couldn't decide whether to rain or bless the day with light. I scrolled through my phone to the email confirmation from the venue. $14, $7.50, paid in full. I stared at it, that tidy little number that represented years of saving, scraping, sacrificing. All for a daughter who had just publicly erased me like a typo. I thought about calling someone, an old friend, maybe my brother, just to say the words out loud. But I didn't. There was nothing left to say. The decision came quietly, but when it settled in my chest, it felt final. Like closing a door I'd been too afraid to even acknowledge before. At 11:03 a.m., 3 hours before the ceremony, I called the venue. The woman on the other end was polite, professional, slightly confused. I told her I needed to cancel the reservation. She hesitated, asked if something had happened. I said yes, something had happened. And I asked about the refund policy. Partial, unfortunately, she said. Given how close we are to the event. I told her I didn't care. I told her to go ahead. Cancel it. I didn't give a reason. I didn't need to. That was the point. Then I turned off my phone. Just powered it down and slid it into the drawer. I didn't leave a trail. I didn't leave a forwarding number. I packed a single bag. 2 changes of clothes, my toothbrush, the one photo of Melina and me from her 5th birthday, where she had cake on her cheeks and was laughing like nothing could ever hurt her. I took that picture, but not because I wanted to remember her as a child. I took it to remind myself that I was there, that I existed, that I mattered, even if she decided I didn't. The last thing I did before I left was write a note. Not long, just a few words on the back of an old receipt. I placed it on the kitchen counter where I knew she'd find it. Let your mom help you, since you grew up with her. That was it. That was all I had left to say. I didn't wait to see her reaction. I didn't need to. I walked out of that house and kept walking. I didn't look back. I don't know what I expected to feel the moment I stepped outside that house, but it wasn't peace. Maybe guilt. Maybe fear. Maybe even regret. But what settled into my bones as I pulled out of the driveway with nothing but a small duffel bag and a half-empty tank of gas was something closer to freedom than I'd ever known. Not the kind of freedom you feel when you escape something bad, but the quiet, resolved kind that comes from finally choosing yourself after years, decades, of shrinking, of waiting for someone to value you like you valued them. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. I was just done. I drove with no real destination in mind, just pointing the car away from town and watching the miles tick by. My phone stayed off, tucked into the glove compartment like it might infect me if I touched it. I didn't want to hear the messages. I didn't want to listen to the panic or the apologies or, worse, the accusations. Because I knew that's what would come. I knew Melina wouldn't see what she did as betrayal. She'd see what I did as abandonment. And maybe, if I let her tell it, that would be the story. My dad left me on my wedding day. Not the 25 years before that. Not the sleepless nights or missed meals or the way I bled for her future. Just the ending. Just the part where I said, no more. By the time the clock struck 2, I was 2 towns over, sitting at a truck stop diner off the highway, staring at a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The server, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and tired hands, asked if I wanted a refill. I said no. I didn't want anything, really. My appetite had vanished somewhere between the venue cancellation and the moment I closed the front door behind me. What I wanted, what I needed, was silence. Space. The absence of expectations. For the first time in years, no one was calling my name from the top of the stairs. No one was asking for rides, for money, for help. I was no one's backup plan. No one's safety net. Just a man sitting in a booth, anonymous and free. I thought about the note again. About how few words it took to summarize a lifetime. Let your mom help you. It felt cruel when I wrote it. But it wasn't meant to be. It was honest. Direct. Maybe the first time I'd ever really been direct with her. I had given her everything. I had made her my world. And she had buried me like I was a footnote to a story that belonged entirely to someone else. If she had just told the truth, even once, I could have lived with that. If she had said, I was raised by my dad, and left it at that. But to erase me? To fabricate a version of her life where I never existed? That wasn't just hurtful. It was strategic. That was the part that burned. The wedding was supposed to start at 4. Around 3:30, I imagined the chaos unfolding. Guests arriving to locked gates. Staff milling around with clipboards and confused expressions. Marcus pacing with his tie half done. Melina checking her phone again and again, wondering why I hadn't shown. I could picture her face when she got home and found the note. The slow unraveling of it all. Part of me wanted to be there. Not to witness the pain, but to finally be seen. To make sure that for once, she couldn't look away from the damage done. But I stayed gone. Not out of spite. Out of necessity. I checked into a cheap motel that night. One of those places where the sheets smell like bleach and the TV still has buttons on the front. I lay on the bed with my hands behind my head, listening to the distant rumble of trucks passing on the highway. My body was still. My mind, not so much. It played through everything on a loop. Her words, the note, the years that came before. I thought about the time she broke her arm in 4th grade and wouldn't let anyone but me hold her hand during the x-ray. The nights she crawled into my bed after nightmares and whispered, "Don't let anything get me, Daddy." How did we get from there to this? At what point did I stop being the hero and start being the ghost? The next morning, I turned my phone back on. I don't know why. Maybe part of me was curious. Maybe I wanted to hear her voice, to see if it cracked when she said my name. The notifications came in like a flood. Calls from her, texts from Marcus, even one from her mother, which was bold considering the woman hadn't spoken to me in over a decade. There was one voicemail from Melina I couldn't bring myself to delete. I listened with the phone on speaker, my hands trembling more than I wanted to admit. "Dad, what the hell? Where are you? The venue said you canceled. Everyone's here. You just left? Without saying anything? I don't understand. Please, call me. Please." There was no apology in her voice. Just panic, confusion, a hint of anger creeping in at the edges. Not once did she say, "I'm sorry." Not once did she say, "I know what I did." That told me everything I needed to know. I deleted the message and blocked the number. That was the moment I realized she was never going to understand. Not fully. And I wasn't going to keep sacrificing my peace so she could continue pretending I never mattered. There's a kind of grief that comes with choosing yourself. A coldness, a silence, but it's a clean grief. A grief without chaos. And I was ready for it. 5 years went by like a slow-moving storm, steady, quiet, but always heavy in the air. There were days when I didn't think about her at all, days when the memory of her voice or the way she laughed felt like someone else's recollection. Then there were days when she appeared everywhere, in the shape of a young woman sitting across from me at the library, scrolling through her phone with the same concentrated furrow in her brow. In the middle of a crowded sidewalk, where I'd hear a voice behind me say, "Dad," and I'd turn, hard in my throat, before realizing it wasn't her. And some nights, in the soft hum of loneliness that crept into the room like an old friend, I'd wonder if I had gone too far. If disappearing had made me cruel instead of justified. But those moments passed. They always passed. Because the truth always came back. She had already erased me long before I left. I moved 3 towns over, found work at a local community center teaching self-defense classes twice a week and handling security for weekend events. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me structure. I rented a small 1-bedroom apartment above a bakery that opened at 5 every morning. The smell of rising bread became my new alarm clock. It was a quiet life. No more panic texts, no more emergency errands, no more being the fallback plan when everything else fell through. For the first time in decades, my life was my own. No one called me Dad anymore. And that was both a relief and a wound I learned to carry without flinching. Then one afternoon, out of nowhere, I heard about her again. It was Marcus's cousin, Dwayne, of all people. He recognized me at the hardware store, pushing a cart of paint supplies. We made small talk for a few minutes. He looked uncomfortable, like he didn't know whether to shake my hand or apologize for something that wasn't his fault. I didn't ask about Melina. I didn't want to open that door. But he brought her up anyway. Said he figured I probably already knew. I shook my head, kept my expression flat. That's when he told me the wedding never happened. Apparently, once the venue canceled and I vanished, everything else spiraled. Marcus's family was furious, blamed Melina for being disorganized and irresponsible. Marcus himself wasn't thrilled either, especially once he found out the venue had been in my name, and I had been footing the bill. There was a fight, a bad one. Something about secrets, about lies, about money. He walked out that same night. Wedding was off. Guests were sent home. Her mother refused to let her back into the house once the engagement collapsed. Said she was too old to be mooching off people without a ring on her finger. Harsh words, even from a woman like her. But it got worse. Melina couldn't keep her job after that. The stress, the shame, the whispers at work. Turns out her boss's daughter was one of the bridesmaids. Word got around. Something about a mental breakdown, about her not showing up to shifts, about drinking a little too much during the week. She spiraled. Dwayne didn't give details, Just said she lost her grip for a while. Ended up sleeping on a friend's couch, bouncing between gigs, and eventually moving out of state. No one heard much after that. He looked at me like he expected something, shock, sorrow, guilt, but I just nodded. Told him thanks for the update. Paid for my supplies, and walked away. I didn't feel joy. I need to make that clear. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about watching her fall apart and cheering from the sidelines. It was about finally knowing that consequences had weight, that the truth doesn't stay buried forever, that rewriting your past comes with a cost when the people you erase decide they're done being silent. I didn't ruin her life. I didn't make her lie. I didn't make her forget who stood by her when no one else would. She did that. She made those choices. And life, unforgiving as it is, held her accountable in ways I never could. But I did feel something. Not happiness. Not sadness. Just closure. Like watching a storm pass in the distance, knowing it's not coming for you. I went home that night and sat on my porch with a glass of iced tea and my favorite book. The sky was soft and purple. The street was quiet. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to explain myself to anyone. I didn't owe her a second chance. I didn't owe her forgiveness just because she was struggling. My silence had been my line in the sand, and I was still standing on the right side of it. A week later, I got a letter in the mail with no return address. The handwriting was hers. I knew it instantly. My stomach tightened, not with fear, but with a sort of distant curiosity. I didn't open it right away. Let it sit on the kitchen table for 3 full days before I finally tore it open and read it standing by the window, the morning sun pouring across the floor. The letter was short, barely a page. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't say she missed me. She said she was sorry for how things turned out. She said she wished I'd come to the wedding, that maybe things would have gone differently if I had. She said she was trying to get her life back together and hoped I was doing well. That was it. No ownership. No real apology. Just a soft reach in my direction, like tossing a pebble into a river and hoping it finds the bottom. I didn't write back. Some people might think that makes me bitter, that I should have taken the opportunity to reconnect. That family is too important to throw away. But those people didn't hear her voice that day. They didn't watch her carve me out of her story like a tumor. They didn't spend years building something only to be told they were never part of it. And they sure as hell didn't vanish to protect the only thing they had left, their dignity. It was late October when she showed up. The trees had already started to blush red and gold, and there was that sharpness in the air that made you zip your jacket a little higher without thinking. I just finished my afternoon shift at the center and was walking the path back toward my apartment, the kind of slow, meandering walk you only develop when you've got no one waiting on you. The bakery downstairs had just put out a fresh tray of pumpkin muffins, and for a split second, I thought about stopping in. But then I saw her, leaning against the hood of a silver sedan parked by the curb like she owned the place, arms crossed, eyes locked on me like we'd spoken yesterday. Like she hadn't vanished for 5 years after burning our bridge to the ground. Melina. She looked older. Not worn down exactly, but softened around the edges. Her hair was shorter now, curled tight around her ears, and there were faint shadows beneath her eyes, like life had been a little too loud for too long. But she stood tall, still had that same stubbornness in her jaw, that same need to be in control of the room, even when she was the guest. "Hi, Dad," she said, like it was normal, like it was simple, like the last time we'd spoken wasn't the day I disappeared and took the future she'd built on lies with me. I didn't answer, just stood there, waiting to see if she came with a script or if this time she'd finally speak the truth. She pushed off the car and walked toward me slowly, her boots crunching against the fallen leaves like they were trying to fill the silence between us. "I didn't know where else to go," she said, voice low, maybe even rehearsed. "I asked Dwayne if he'd heard from you, and well, here I am." I let her talk. I didn't move, didn't nod, didn't invite her inside. She looked around, maybe hoping for a warmer welcome, and when she didn't get one, she sighed. "Look, I know you're angry," she started, but I held up a hand. "No," I said, my voice calm. "Steady. You don't know. You assume. And if you came here for forgiveness, say that. Don't start with guessing games." That threw her off. I saw it in the way her mouth opened, then closed. Like she hadn't planned for directness. like she expected the same man who always folded to rise from the ashes and embrace her with open arms. But I wasn't that man anymore. That man died the moment I heard her erase me from her life in one smooth, practiced sentence. That man went extinct with the stroke of a pen on a cancellation email and a note left on a kitchen counter. "I came to explain," she said finally, eyes searching mine. I know what I said was wrong. I panicked. I was trying to make things simple for Marcus's family. They were conservative, judgmental. I thought if I made my life sound clean, less complicated. "You made it sound like I didn't exist," I cut in. "No shouting. No theatrics. Just facts. You didn't simplify. You erased. You could have told them the truth and stood by it. You didn't. And don't pretend it was a one-time slip. You'd said it before. You lived it. You told that story enough times that it felt normal to say out loud." She swallowed hard, blinking quickly. I saw her shoulders tense, like she was trying to keep herself from folding. "I was ashamed," she admitted, and for a second, just a second, I saw a flicker of the girl I used to know. Not a view of me, of how we grew up, of not having what other girls had. And I thought if I could rewrite it a little, just a little, maybe things would be easier. I nodded slowly, more to myself than to her. "But you rewrote it without asking if I was okay being deleted." She didn't respond. The wind picked up, stirring the trees and making the moment stretch longer than it needed to. She looked down at her hands, then back at me. "I lost everything after you left," she said. "Marcus, the job, the apartment. Mom kicked me out. I've been working in Arizona, waitressing, saving up. I'm doing better now. But I never stopped thinking about you." I wanted to believe her. God knows I did. But words were cheap. And we were standing in the wreckage of years, not days. "So why now?" I asked. "Why come back after all this time?" She shrugged, eyes glassy. "Because I thought maybe we could start over. That maybe, if I explained, you'd understand." I exhaled slowly. There it was. The hope. The soft landing she still believed she was owed. But this wasn't a circle we could close with an apology and a hug. This was a canyon she dug herself, one careful omission at a time. "Understand?" "Melina, I understood the moment I heard you say I never existed. That's the clearest thing you ever gave me. And I've built a life since then. A life without waiting, without begging, without watching you rewrite history while expecting me to pay the bill." Her face fell then, not dramatically, but in that quiet, crumbling way people do when they realize the damage wasn't just temporary. She looked around, maybe hoping someone would interrupt, someone would tell her this was a dream and she could wake up. But no one came. There was just me, and I wasn't saving her this time. She stepped back, wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. "I don't know what I expected," she said, voice breaking just slightly. "Neither do I," I replied. "But it wasn't this." She nodded, turned, walked back to her car. She didn't slam the door, didn't speed off, just drove away, slow and quiet, like someone leaving a place for the last time. And I stood there, still holding my grocery bag, still hearing the wind rattle the leaves around me. And that was that. The morning after she left, I woke up before the sun. Not because I couldn't sleep, but because something inside me had settled. There was no weight pressing against my ribs, no storm rolling behind my eyes. Just quiet, just breath. I made myself a cup of coffee, black and bitter the way I'd learned to prefer it over the years, and sat by the window as the world outside began to stretch itself into light. I watched as the street slowly came to life. An old man walking his dog, the bakery owner unlocking the front door, the paperboy tossing headlines no one really wanted to read. And I just sat there, not needing to be anywhere, not needing to perform. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I wasn't bracing for a call. I wasn't waiting for someone to remember I mattered. I was simply existing. And that was enough. I thought about Melina, how she looked standing there in front of me, not quite the woman I raised, but not entirely a stranger either. I replayed her voice, her excuses, her admissions. There was truth in them, I won't deny that. There was pain, there was shame, but there was also something else, a quiet expectation that because I had always shown up, I would do it again. That I would step in and pick up the pieces like I used to when she broke something or fell too hard. That the history she had rewritten could be edited again, this time to include me, when it was convenient. But the thing about being erased is that once someone decides you were never there, You don't just reappear when it suits the narrative. You stay gone. Not out of revenge. Out of self-respect. Over the next few weeks, I didn't hear from her. No texts. No letters. No surprise visits. And I was glad for it. Not because I wanted her to hurt, but because silence was its own kind of boundary. It told me she finally understood that the door wasn't left ajar. It had been closed, and not out of malice, but out of necessity. I had spent too much of my life waiting for scraps of acknowledgement, too many years pretending that love without respect was enough to keep a father going. It wasn't. Not anymore. The people at the center noticed a change in me, I think. I was lighter somehow. More present. One of the younger guys I trained, Jordan, said I seemed chiller lately. I laughed at that. If only he knew. If only he had seen the years I spent folding myself into smaller and smaller shapes to fit inside the role of the perfect father. If only he'd seen how hollow that label became when the person it was meant for decided it didn't exist. But Jordan didn't need to know all that. He was just a kid trying to learn how to stand his ground. So I taught him. And in teaching him, I reminded myself that standing firm doesn't always look like yelling. Sometimes it's just leaving. One evening, a woman I'd gotten to know at the bakery, Teresa, widowed, sweet, always smelled like cinnamon, invited me to dinner. It wasn't a date, not exactly, but it was nice. We talked about books, about music, about the odd joy of finding peace later in life. She didn't ask about my past, and I didn't offer it. There was a mutual understanding between us, two people who had seen enough of life to know that not every scar needs a story attached. Sometimes, it's enough just to sit across from someone who isn't trying to fix you or figure you out. Someone who just lets you be. A few months later, around spring, I received another letter. This one was longer, more thoughtful. She talked about therapy, about finally admitting to herself the damage she'd caused. She said she didn't expect forgiveness, that she just wanted me to know she was working on becoming someone better, that she understood now, understood what it meant to truly betray someone, not with action, but with absence, that she regretted it. Every single word. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it neatly, placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk, and went on with my day. Not because I didn't care, but because I did. And caring doesn't always mean reopening wounds. Sometimes, it means letting them heal without picking at the stitches every time someone says they're sorry. I didn't need her to suffer. I didn't need her to grovel. I needed her to learn. And from what I could tell, she finally had. That was enough for me. Now, on quiet days, I sit on the porch and watch the neighborhood kids ride their bikes down the hill. I sip my coffee. I listen to the birds. I think about the man I used to be, the one who bent over backwards for love, who gave and gave until he forgot there was anything left of himself to protect. And I don't hate that man. I just wish he'd known sooner that love isn't proven by sacrifice alone. That real love includes being seen. And when you're not seen, truly seen, you have every right to walk away. I still keep that old photo of Melina and me in the living room. Her cheeks covered in frosting, my arm around her tiny shoulders, both of us laughing like nothing could ever go wrong. I don't keep it because I'm holding on. I keep it because it's real. Because whatever came after, that moment was truth. That man existed. That little girl loved him. And for that one sliver in time, it was enough. People say family is everything. But I've learned that sometimes, everything you need begins when you stop letting the word family excuse the hurt. When you start defining your own worth not by who you raised, but by who you are. And I am a man who gave everything, who walked away not out of hate, but out of love for himself. And that, more than anything, is what I deserve. If this story hit home, if you've ever been the one who gave everything only to be written out of someone else's version of the truth, then you know how hard it is to walk away. But sometimes walking away is the most powerful thing you can do. If this story moved you, made you think, or reminded you of the importance of standing firm in your worth, don't keep it to yourself. Like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more powerful stories about family, betrayal, and finding peace on your own terms. See you soon in the next one. You must be out of your mind, my daughter exclaimed when I showed up at her college graduation, holding a flower in hand for her. She said, Others are getting cars and mansions for their children, and this is what you got for me." Then she took the flower from me and threw it away. What happened after that was rather unexpected, and I wasn't the one going to be shocked. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Simon Maine from New York. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I never thought a single flower could be the reason I changed the course of everything I'd ever planned. But then again, I never thought my daughter, the child I held before she could even open her eyes, the girl I worked double shifts for, missed doctor's appointments and family reunions for, would ever look at me the way she did that afternoon. I used to believe there was a bond between us, something unspoken but deeply rooted, the kind of connection that no amount of teenage angst or generational difference could break. I was wrong, because on the day of her college graduation, I stood outside the ceremony hall, holding a flower in my hand, and realized that I had no idea who she really was anymore. The flower wasn't random. I'd picked it myself that morning from the garden behind the house, a white camellia, pure, quiet, elegant. It was her late grandmother's favorite. Tara used to help me tend that garden when she was little. She'd dig in the dirt with her tiny fingers and ask questions about every plant, every color. She used to laugh when she found worms. Back then, she loved the simple things. She didn't care about money or cars or appearances. Somewhere along the way, that little girl slipped through my fingers, and in her place stood this polished, bitter young woman who had begun to see life as a transaction. So, yes, I brought her a flower. Not because I couldn't afford more, but because I wanted to see what she'd do with it. I needed to know if there was still a trace of that child I once knew. She spotted me before I could wave. She was surrounded by friends, their arms full of gift bags and envelopes. Some guy next to her had just received a Tesla from his parents, wrapped in a red bow, the kind you only see in commercials. Another girl flashed the keys to a new condo like it was a party favor. I didn't come to outshine anyone. I came with something personal, something meaningful. I approached her with a smile and extended the camellia like it was a piece of my heart. "Congratulations, sweetheart," I said. "I'm so proud of you." Her face twisted into something sharp and cold. "You must be out of your mind," she said, loud enough for her friends to hear. Laughter followed, awkward and scattered. She looked at the flower like it was an insult. "Others are getting cars and mansions for their children, and this is what you got for me." Her tone didn't tremble. It sliced. And then, without a second's hesitation, she took the flower from my hand and threw it on the ground. Time slowed down. The people around us faded. I couldn't move. I just stared at the petals scattered on the concrete. They looked like pieces of something fragile and irreplaceable, like something once whole, now ruined by the weight of expectation and pride. I didn't say anything then. I just turned and walked away. I heard one of her friends ask, "Was that your dad?" And her reply was simple, "Yeah, he's cheap." That word echoed louder than anything else. Cheap. Not hardworking. Not devoted. Not even old-fashioned. Just cheap. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my study surrounded by the documents I'd prepared weeks in advance. Everything neat and notarized, signed but not yet handed over. The transfer of ownership for my company, the deed to a new townhouse in her name, the lease on a brand new SUV that was parked in a friend's garage waiting for the right moment. I had imagined her face lighting up when I surprised her at home after graduation. I had rehearsed the speech in my head. How proud I was. How I wanted her to take over the business not because I was tired, but because I believed in her. But none of that made sense anymore. That flower was never just a gift, it was a test. And she failed. At sunrise, I made coffee and waited for her to come home. She finally walked in just before noon, tossing her heels aside and scrolling through her phone. I watched her from the kitchen, letting the silence hang heavy. She didn't look at me, didn't say a word. That was my cue. I called her name once, just once. And when she looked up, I held out the folder. Her brow furrowed, and she came over, confused. "What's this?" she asked, flipping through the pages. Her eyes widened as the reality of what she held settled in. "That," I said quietly, was what you were supposed to receive yesterday. The company, the house, the car, everything I've worked for. She froze, mouth slightly open, but I didn't stop. But you showed me who you really are, Tara. You humiliated me over a flower. You mocked something sacred. And in that moment, you proved you don't deserve any of it. Her phone slipped from her hand. Wait, Dad, no. I didn't mean it like that. I was surprised. Everyone else. You showed your character. I interrupted. That's what matters. Not what anyone else did. Not what you expected. You revealed your heart, and it was ugly. She started to cry. Actual tears, not the performative kind. She reached for my arm, and I stepped back. Please, she whispered. I'm sorry, okay? I was just overwhelmed. Her mother came downstairs at the sound of voices. The moment she realized what was happening, she took Tara's side without asking a single question. You're punishing her for being emotional on her graduation day, she said. That's cruel, even for you. I looked at them both, and I felt something inside me settle. Not harden, not turn cold, just settle. She's not getting anything from me, I said, my voice calm but final. And neither of you are going to guilt me into changing that. Tara fell to the floor sobbing. Her mother called me heartless. I walked past them both and locked the folder away. Then I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. We need to revise the will, I said. Take her out. And just like that, the girl I raised became a stranger. I sat alone in the study that evening, the folder tucked away in the locked drawer beside me. The house felt heavier than usual, quieter too, like even the walls were holding their breath, unsure of what I'd do next. The echo of Tara's voice still rang in my ears, her cries, her pleading, the way her fingers had clutched at my sleeve before I pulled away. And beneath all that noise, there was something worse. The deep, cutting realization that everything I had built had been misunderstood. I hadn't wanted to raise a spoiled child. I had wanted to raise a strong, thoughtful woman. But somewhere along the line, those values had twisted, and I was too blind, or too tired, to see it until it was too late. I stared at the fireplace, at the photo of Tara on the mantel in her kindergarten cap and gown, holding a handmade card that read, I love my daddy because he buys me pancakes. That memory used to bring me warmth. Now it only made my chest tighten. I thought about all the birthdays I spent working overtime, trying to get ahead just enough to make her life easier. I remembered the Christmas I skipped dinner to drive 4 hours and close a last-minute deal, so she could have the exact gaming laptop she'd asked for. At the time, I believed sacrifice was love. I still believe that. But now I understand that sacrifice without boundaries becomes resentment. And when love isn't appreciated, it turns into something far more dangerous, disappointment. The truth is, this wasn't just about the flower. It was about everything that came before it, everything I'd ignored because I didn't want to believe it. There were signs. I just refused to see them. Like the time she insulted a waitress for getting her order wrong, and when I pulled her aside to correct her, she rolled her eyes and said, Dad, you don't have to act broke all the time. I chalked it up to immaturity. Or the time she said she'd never date anyone who drove anything less than a BMW. That stung, considering I'd driven a Toyota pickup for 20 years without complaint. I wanted to believe it was just talk, that she'd outgrow it. But now I see, it wasn't talk. It was the foundation she'd been building. A tower of ego. And it finally collapsed under the weight of a single flower. The folder I had shown her was just a glimpse. There were more papers. I opened another drawer and pulled out the sealed envelope with her name written in my handwriting. Inside was a letter I'd written 6 months ago when I first decided to name her the successor of my company. I had poured my heart into that letter, telling her how proud I was, how I saw her potential as a leader, how I hoped she'd bring compassion and integrity to the legacy I had built. Now, I couldn't even bring myself to read it again. I folded it, slipped it back into the envelope, and placed it in the shredder without a word. The company had been my life. 32 years of sweat, failure, rebuilding, and stubborn faith. I started it in a garage with nothing but a second-hand desk and a Rolodex of names that barely answered my calls. There were days I ate ramen for dinner and nights I slept under my desk. But I pushed through. And when it finally took off, when we got our first real contract and I saw the number on that check, I remember thinking, one day, This will be Tara's. That dream had kept me going. Through market crashes, lost clients, lawsuits, even health scares, I held on because I believed I was building something for her. For us. Now, it felt like I had been building a monument she never cared to visit. Around midnight, I poured myself a glass of whiskey, something I rarely do, and sat on the back porch watching the wind move through the trees. That garden where I had picked the flower was silent now, the petals asleep, the soil cool. I thought of her grandmother, my mother, who used to say, "Gratitude isn't about saying thank you. It's about how you treat the people who show up when it counts." That woman survived war, poverty, and loss. She raised me with steel in her spine and grace in her heart. I wanted Tara to inherit that strength. But somehow, somewhere between ballet recitals and private tutors, I gave her everything except the one thing that mattered: perspective. I didn't hear Tara come outside until she sat quietly in the chair beside me. She didn't say anything at first, just pulled her knees to her chest like she used to when she was small. The silence between us stretched until it hurt. Then she said, "You were right. I was ungrateful. And I'm sorry." Her voice was low, trembling, not performative, not theatrical, just broken. I looked at her, and for a moment, I saw the little girl again. But only for a moment. I took a deep breath and stared ahead. I didn't want an apology, Tara. I wanted to believe you still had the heart to understand something simple. That love doesn't come wrapped in a bow or parked in a driveway. That a flower, picked by hand, could mean more than a leased luxury car. She wiped her face with her sleeve. "I just got caught up in everything. Everyone was watching. I thought you were making a point. I didn't know you had all that waiting for me." "That's the point," I said. "You shouldn't have needed to know. You should have seen the flower and thought, 'My dad came to see me. He brought something personal.' That should have been enough." "It wasn't a trick, Tara. It was a mirror." She reached out and grabbed my hand. I let her, for a minute. But then I pulled away gently. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. "I love you. That'll never change. But I can't reward that kind of entitlement. Not after everything. You have to understand, this isn't just about a gift. It's about who you're becoming. And if I hand you everything now, I'll only be confirming that disrespect comes with prizes. It doesn't." She sat still, tears running down her face. "So what happens now?" I stood, stretched, and looked up at the sky. "Now, we both live with the consequences of what we showed each other." I walked back inside and closed the door behind me. The next morning began like any other. Coffee brewing, sunlight slipping through the kitchen blinds, birds chirping in the maple outside the window. But everything else about the house had changed. I could feel it in the air, thick with unspoken blame and restless grief. Tara hadn't come out of her room. Her door was closed, her graduation cap and gown tossed over the stair railing like an afterthought. Her mother, Vanessa, was already waiting for me at the table, arms crossed, a storm sitting quietly in her eyes. I didn't even get to sit down before she started. "You know what you did was cruel," she said, her voice calm but loaded. "You humiliated her." I poured my coffee and took a long sip before answering. "I didn't humiliate her. She did that on her own. All I did was give her a flower." Vanessa scoffed and shook her head like I was speaking in riddles. "She's 22, not 60. You know how this generation thinks. Everything is online. Everything's about appearance. You brought a flower when everyone else was giving luxury cars. You set her up, and then you turned it into some kind of moral test. That's not parenting. That's punishment disguised as principle." Her words hit me, not because they were right, but because they were so deeply wrong it stunned me. I stared at her for a moment, searching for some flicker of understanding, but there was none. Just frustration. Just defense. I leaned back in my chair, my voice lower now. "So you're saying we should cater to her ego? Reward her for publicly disrespecting her father? Is that what good parenting looks like to you?" "She's our daughter," Vanessa snapped. "Not a business deal. You don't cut her out of your life over one bad moment." "One bad moment," I repeated, stunned. This wasn't a tantrum in a grocery store when she was 5. She's a grown woman. She insulted me, mocked a meaningful gift, and then cried only when she found out what she lost. That wasn't a mistake, Vanessa. That was her showing her character. Vanessa stood abruptly, pacing now. She's been under pressure. College hasn't been easy. Social media, peer pressure, It all gets in their heads. You don't know what it's like for her. And she doesn't know what it's like for me. I snapped. To work 30 years to build something from scratch. To sacrifice every comfort so she could have a chance at something better. And when the moment came to show a little grace, a little appreciation, she threw it on the ground. Vanessa's voice broke. She's still your child. I know, I said, quieter now. But that doesn't mean I hand her the world after she spits on it. The room fell silent. For a few seconds, we just stared at each other. Two people who had once shared everything, now divided by how we saw the same child. I realized something important in that silence. Vanessa and I hadn't just grown apart after the divorce. We'd been raising two different versions of Tara under the same roof. I believed in accountability. She believed in cushioning every fall. And somewhere in between, our daughter learned to play both sides. Later that day, I heard Tara moving around the kitchen. I didn't go down. I stayed in my office, letting her exist without me. But I could hear the sounds: cabinet doors opening, a cereal box rustling, the clink of a spoon against ceramic. Familiar sounds. Domestic. Almost peaceful. But I didn't feel peace. I felt exhaustion. Emotional exhaustion from years of compromise, of quieting my instincts just to keep the household from falling apart. I'd been the bad cop for so long. I didn't even recognize what it meant to simply be a father anymore. Around noon, Vanessa knocked on the office door. She didn't wait for an invitation, just stepped inside, holding her phone. You should see this, she said. She turned the screen toward me. It was a social media post. Tara's, of course. A photo of the graduation stage. No caption, but the comments were already filling in the blanks. Where's your car? One friend joked. Your dad's a cheapskate, another wrote. But it was Tara's own reply that burned into my chest like a brand. Some parents just don't believe in showing up, even when they're standing right in front of you. I handed the phone back without a word. That's what she thinks of me, I said finally. After everything. That I didn't show up. I laughed, cold, bitter. Maybe I was a fool all along. Vanessa didn't say anything. She stood there, unsure, the phone still in her hand. Eventually, she turned and left, her silence louder than any argument. That evening, Mark came by, my oldest friend, the kind of guy who never sugarcoated anything. He had heard about what happened from a cousin who was at the graduation. Small towns never needed social media to gossip. Word spread faster than wildfire. We sat on the back porch, just like we had as teenagers, sneaking beers and dreaming big. She really threw it? He asked, when I told him everything. Didn't even flinch, I said. Like it was garbage. Mark let out a low whistle and leaned back. Man, I don't blame you for being pissed. But let me ask you something. Was the flower really a gift? Or was it a trap? I didn't answer right away. I didn't like the question. Because deep down, I had to admit, maybe part of me had been testing her. Not to be cruel, but because I needed to know. I needed to see, once and for all, whether she was ready. Whether she understood what mattered. Whether she deserved the weight of the legacy I was about to give her. I don't know, I said finally. Maybe it was both. Mark nodded slowly. Sometimes the lesson ain't in what they do. It's in how we respond. You've shown her the cost. Now the question is, are you willing to let her earn it back? I didn't answer. Because I didn't know. The next morning, I woke with a clarity that felt colder than peace. It wasn't comfort. It wasn't rage. It was something in between, like that quiet stillness after a storm, where the air still smells of rain and everything feels more fragile than before. I got dressed in silence, the house around me sleeping or pretending to. I didn't bother with breakfast. I walked past the kitchen, past the family photos that now felt like relics of another era, and out the front door with the folder tucked under my arm. It was time. No more questions. No more waiting for someone to change. I was going to rewrite the story, and this time, I would be the author, not the exhausted narrator watching from the sidelines. The drive to my lawyer's office was quiet. No music, no news, just the hum of the road and the slow ache in my chest that pulsed like a bruise. Every red light gave me a moment to think, and every green light pulled me forward, whether I wanted to go or not. I kept seeing her face. Tara's face, on that stage, twisted in embarrassment and anger. And then I saw her the next morning, tears streaming, trying to rewind the moment like it had never happened. But it had happened, and you can't unspill a cup that was meant to be shared with respect. My lawyer, Dennis, greeted me with a slow nod. We'd known each other for over 20 years. He drafted my first will when Tara was 5 and updated it again when Vanessa and I split. He was the kind of man who didn't speak unless it mattered, which is why I respected him. When I handed him the folder and told him I needed to take Tara out of the company succession plan and the will, he raised one eyebrow but said nothing. He only asked one question. "Are you sure?" And I was. I didn't flinch. I didn't second guess. "Yes," I said. "She's not ready. She doesn't value the legacy. I won't put 30 years of work in the hands of someone who treats it like a party favor." Dennis nodded and began typing. The keys clicked slowly, deliberately, like the ticking of a clock winding down the old plan and writing something new. As I sat there watching him, I felt a strange wave of grief. Not for the money, not for the business, but for the dream. The dream of handing the baton to someone with pride. The dream of watching her take the company to new heights. The dream of being seen by my child not as a bank account or a background prop, but as a man, a father, a builder. When the documents were ready, I signed them without ceremony. Just my name, over and over, until it no longer felt like mine. By the time I walked out of that office, Tara was officially removed from every asset, every title, every plan I'd once drawn with her initials etched into the margins. It felt like amputating a part of myself to save the whole. On the way home, I stopped at the cemetery where my parents were buried. I hadn't been there in over a year. Life gets busy. Grief gets heavy. But today, it felt necessary. I stood between their headstones, Dad on the left, Mom on the right, and let the wind fill the space around me. The sky was overcast, and the air smelled like cut grass and old stone. I knelt down, brushed a few leaves off their names, and just spoke softly into the silence. "I tried," I said. "I really did. I gave her everything. I thought if I just worked hard enough, provided enough, loved her the way you taught me to, that she'd grow up grateful, that she'd carry what I built with pride." But somewhere along the way, she started thinking love was measured in price tags and followers. I swallowed hard. My throat tightened. I didn't raise her that way. I swear I didn't. But maybe I looked the other way too many times. Maybe I confused giving with parenting. Maybe I just wanted to be the dad who never said no because I knew how much it hurt when the answer was always no growing up. I sat down on the bench nearby, my hands folded like I was in church. And maybe I was. A church of regrets. A cathedral of could-have-beens. A voice behind me broke the quiet. "You always talk to them like that." It was Mark, of course. Somehow, he always knew when to show up unannounced, and exactly when I needed someone to witness my worst thoughts without judgment. I nodded. Sometimes I don't know who else to say these things to. He sat beside me and didn't speak for a while. We just watched the trees sway. Birds landed, pecked at the grass, flew off. Life moving forward, as it always does. "You think she's lost for good?" he finally asked. I sighed. "I don't know. But she's lost right now. And I can't risk everything I've worked for on a maybe." He scratched his chin, the way he always did when weighing something heavy. "You ever think about giving her one more shot? Not everything. Not the whole kingdom. Just a piece. See what she does with it." I shook my head. "That's not how this works, Mark. This isn't monopoly money. This is my life. My name. My sacrifices. You don't get do-overs when the stakes are this high." Mark nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. Not because he disagreed, but because he still believed in the possibility of change. Maybe I did too, but I wasn't about to bet my legacy on it. Later that night, back home, I took out a journal I hadn't touched in years. It had Tara's name engraved on the front, a gift I once planned to fill with letters and hand to her on her wedding day. I flipped through the empty pages until I found the first clean sheet. And I wrote, "You may never understand why I did what I did. But one day, when you've lived enough and lost enough, I hope you'll see that boundaries are not abandonment. They're the last act of love we offer when every other attempt has failed." I closed the book, placed it in the drawer beside my bed, and turned off the light. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply accepted what was. The rewrite was done. Now all that remained was living with it. I should have known it wouldn't stay private. Not in this family. Not in this world. By the end of that week, The decision I made in a quiet lawyer's office had morphed into a wildfire, leaping across dinner tables, group chats, and Sunday brunches like gossip on gasoline. It started with my sister, Cheryl, who, true to form, acted like the family historian and town crier all rolled into one. She called me 3 times that Sunday. I ignored the first 2. The third came with a text that said, "You owe me an explanation." I picked up, not because I owed her anything, but because I was curious how fast the news had traveled. The moment I answered, she didn't even say hello. "You disinherited your daughter?" she snapped, voice rising like a kettle left too long on the stove. "What the hell is wrong with you, Marcus?" I leaned against the counter, holding the phone away from my ear for a moment. "Hello to you too, Cheryl. I'm doing fine, thanks for asking." "Don't get cute with me," she hissed. "You think people aren't talking?" The whole family chat is lit up. Even Aunt Denise chimed in, and she hasn't texted since Obama left office. "I made a choice," I said evenly. "One I don't have to explain to anyone who wasn't in the room when she threw a flower on the ground like it was trash." There was a pause, then a scoff. "You gave her a flower, Marcus. She just graduated college. You know how that looked." "I know how it felt," I snapped. "Like watching your child spit on your heart because it didn't come with a bow on top." Silence again, longer this time. But Cheryl was never one to back off. "You always did like playing the martyr," she muttered. "You act like everything you do is righteous just because you suffered more than the rest of us. But maybe, just maybe, this time, you're punishing her because you can't control her anymore." Her words hit me like ice water, not because they were true, but because I knew she believed them. I realized, in that moment, that no one outside this house would ever really understand what happened. They'd hear the headline, not the story. "Father cuts off daughter for rejecting flower." It was simpler that way, easier to digest. But simple doesn't mean honest. By Monday, Tara's post had gained traction. It started with a vague caption over a selfie in her cap and gown. "Not all parents are proud. Some just show up to hurt you one last time." It had hundreds of likes within the hour. I only knew because one of my employees brought it to my attention, concerned. I read every word, every comment. Some were from friends. Some were from strangers. That's heartbreaking. You deserve better. Parents like that don't realize the damage they cause. I stared at the screen, numb. It didn't matter that none of them knew me. It didn't matter that they only had one side. What mattered was that my daughter, the person I built my life around, had chosen to paint me as a villain for a digital audience before ever trying to understand my reasons. That night, the doorbell rang. It was Mark again. He held up a 6-pack and gave me a crooked smile. "Figured you'd need one." We sat on the porch in silence for a while. He scrolled through his phone, shaking his head. "You know she posted that thing, right?" "Yeah," I muttered. "I saw it. She's hurting, man." "I'm hurting too." Mark nodded. "I know. But one of you is still the parent." I clenched my jaw. "Don't do that. Don't pull the be the bigger man card. I was the parent. For 22 years. And look where it got me." He took a long sip of beer. "Still doesn't mean you're wrong. But you can be right and still lose." I didn't answer. I didn't want to admit how much I feared that was exactly what was happening. That I was standing on principle. Yes, but maybe on an island too. I hadn't spoken to Tara in days. Vanessa had moved out temporarily, claiming she needed space, which was her way of saying, "You've pushed us both too far." I was alone in the house I built, with the echo of memories I didn't know how to mourn. Every room reminded me of something. Her first steps in the hallway, her drawings still magnet to the fridge, the broken banister I never fixed because she liked to slide down it like a playground. Now it all felt like a museum to a family that no longer existed. The next morning, I went into the office early. I buried myself in work, contracts, budgets, performance reviews, anything that didn't require me to feel. Around lunchtime, Janine, my assistant of 15 years, knocked on my door. She was holding an envelope. "This came in for you," she said gently. From her. I took it without a word. She hovered, like she wanted to say more, but thought better of it. When she left, I stared at the envelope for a long time. Her handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Round, neat, slightly slanted. I remembered helping her learn to write her name, tracing it over and over until she didn't need my hand under hers. Now here it was again. Still hers, still mine. But something had changed. I opened it slowly, afraid of what I'd find. Inside was a letter. No dramatic apology. No manipulative plea. Just raw honesty. I can't take back what I said. Or how I acted. I was embarrassed and angry and didn't know how to handle any of it. I thought the flower meant you'd stop trying. I didn't know it was the last try. I understand now why you did what you did. I don't agree with it. But I see it. And I miss you. That's all. I folded it, placed it in the drawer, and sat back in my chair. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't even enough to start a real conversation. But it was something. A crack in the wall. A thread still hanging. And I didn't know what to do with it. I used to think closure was something you reached. Like a destination on a map, clearly marked and waiting with open arms. But in the weeks that followed Tara's letter, I realized closure isn't a finish line. It's a choice. It's a boundary you draw in the sand after your heart's been cracked open one too many times. Some days, it looks like forgiveness. Other days, it looks like silence. And on the hardest days, it's simply waking up and deciding not to rewrite history just because someone else regrets how they played their part. The letter stayed in my desk drawer, unopened after that first read. I never responded. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood that caring didn't mean returning to what had already been broken beyond repair. The house was quieter now. Vanessa never moved back in. She called once or twice to check in, but the warmth between us had long cooled. We had drifted apart years ago, held together only by the shared gravity of parenthood. And now that gravity had collapsed. Sometimes I'd see Tara's social media posts pop up, pictures with friends, a new apartment, the occasional vague caption about growing pains or learning lessons. I never liked or commented. I didn't stalk her pages like some tortured father waiting for a breadcrumb trail. But I saw enough to know she was surviving. Maybe even starting to see the world through a different lens. But I also knew I couldn't be the one to guide her through that anymore. There were moments, brief, fleeting, when doubt crept in. When I asked myself if I had been too harsh, too final. When I'd wake up from dreams where she was 7 again, running through the backyard barefoot, asking me to push her higher on the swing. In those dreams, she always turned to look at me, eyes wide with that unfiltered trust children have. And every time I reached for her, she vanished. I'd wake up with my hand in the air, the ache so real it pressed down on my chest like a weight. But I never let those dreams rewrite the reality. Because the truth is, I didn't walk away from Tara. She stepped over the line. And when I stood firm, she mistook it for abandonment instead of the boundary it was. One Saturday, I found myself standing in the garden again. It had been weeks since I last tended it, and the neglect was obvious. Overgrown hedges, browning leaves, the flower beds choking on weeds. I grabbed the gloves and shears from the shed and started cutting back everything that had grown wild in my absence. There was something therapeutic in it, snipping away the parts that no longer served a purpose. Making space for something new to grow. That's when I saw it. Another white camellia, blooming against all odds, tucked behind a cluster of ivy. Not the same one I picked for Tara, but nearly identical. Pristine, untouched, and somehow, it felt like a message from the universe. A reminder that life continues, whether it's witnessed or not. I sat on the porch with the flower in my hand, turning it gently between my fingers. So small, so delicate, and yet it had survived the heat, the storms, the neglect. That's what I wanted for my daughter. Not a punishment, not a grudge, but a reckoning that would make her stronger. I didn't want her to crumble under rejection. I wanted her to realize that love isn't always soft. Sometimes it's sharp. Sometimes it's wrapped in disappointment and tied with consequences. And the sooner she learned that, the better chance she had at not repeating the same mistakes with someone else. A few days later, I got a text from my niece, Cheryl's daughter, Lila. She was 24, fresh out of grad school, and had always looked at me like I hung the moon. Uncle Marcus, the message read, I heard about everything. I just want you to know that not everyone sees you as the villain. Some of us understand. And we're still proud of you. That message hit harder than I expected. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear it. Not because I doubted my decision, but because the loneliness of standing firm can sometimes feel like punishment in itself. But in that moment, I realized something important. Legacy isn't just about inheritance. It's about influence. And maybe the impact I had wouldn't come through bloodlines or business shares, but through the example I set, even when it hurt. Weeks turned into months. The business thrived. I handed more responsibility to my COO, took Fridays off, and started mentoring young entrepreneurs in the community. Men and women who reminded me of myself at 30, hungry, unsure, desperate to build something that mattered. I told them the truth, not the glossed-up version. I told them that building something great takes more than money. It takes values. And you don't just pass those down with a check. You pass them down through how you live, through what you accept, through the standards you refuse to lower, even for the people you love the most. One evening, I was speaking at a local business panel. After the talk, a young man approached me and said, "You mentioned your daughter in your speech. Do you think you'll ever reconcile?" I paused, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to say it without anger or grief. Just truth. "I hope so," I told him, "but only if it's built on respect, not regret." And that's where I stand today. No dramatic reunion, no tearful makeup hug, just life, quiet, steady, and grounded in the hardest decision I've ever made. I still love Tara. I always will. But love without boundaries isn't love. It's fear wearing a disguise. And I'm not afraid anymore. Not of being misunderstood. Not of being alone. And certainly not of standing by the values that shaped everything I am. I didn't pick another flower. I left that one blooming, untouched. Because some things don't need to be picked. They just need to be seen. And if she ever walks back into this garden, on her own, ready, changed, it'll be waiting. Just like me. Have you ever had to draw a line with someone you love, even when it tore you apart inside? Do you believe tough love can be the most honest kind? Drop your thoughts in the comments, whether you agree or not. These stories are raw, but they're real, and your voice matters more than you think. If this story made you feel something, like, share, and subscribe for more deeply personal stories that speak to the heart and never shy away from the hard truths. See you soon in the next one.